Thank you, everybody, for making it to part 2 of Layoffs to Lemonade. As you know, we've designed this series because, let's face it, it's tough out there, especially in our industry of tech. There are a lot of people who've been impacted by layoffs, myself included. I was laid off from my vice president role last autumn. But even if you haven't been laid off, a lot of people have been let down. Maybe you didn't get the pay rise that you wanted to get. Maybe you didn't get the promotion that you wanted to get. Maybe you just haven't been supported the way that you want to be. What we were talking about this week in the Hustle Crew newsletter, in the latest Insight article that we talked about, is that underrepresented people have been the most impacted by layoffs. So if you're a woman of color especially, statistics are showing that you're going to be in the larger proportion of people who are being laid off. And this just compounds the problems that many of us are already facing as underrepresented people in the workplace. So what do we do about it? How do we actually navigate these next few months, these next few years, so that we're not slowing down our ambitions and our life goals? And I think the key to that really is building up your confidence and building up your personal brand. If you have a direct relationship with your industry through your personal brand, through speaking engagements, through press mentions, through consulting, first of all, you have a diversified income stream. You're not just relying on your salary to pay your bills, to pay for vacations and fun experiences. But secondly, you're also creating a dialogue with important stakeholders. Those stakeholders could be future bosses, future customers, future clients. And there's something incredibly powerful that comes with being able to have your own voice in the industry. If I think back to 2016, before I started Hustle Crew, I was just another woman in tech. In fact, I was the only Black woman in a small travel startup here in London. As a result of that, I faced a lot of exclusion, and all of my efforts to try and get support from leadership just fell on deaf ears. Now, when I walked away from that company, no one would give me a reference. I tried to get my boss to give me a reference, and he said, well, I think you're a difficult person because you kept complaining about sexism and racism. And I felt so powerless at the time. It was really hard to get another job. But if I fast forward to 6 years later, I will never need another reference because people know who I am, and that's what I want for you. So if you haven't seen part 1 of Layoffs to Lemonade, I really recommend you review the worksheet and you review the video. What we're going to focus on in today's session really is activating creator mode, because that's what I did back in 2016 when I couldn't get references, when I started my business and I thought I'm going to make it on my own. I had to activate this influencer mode, this creator mode. I had to start telling my story so that I could get press, so that I could get jobs, and so I could get paid. And that's what we're going to cover today. So let's jump into it. As I said last time, we focused more on self-awareness and finding a work-life compatibility that suits your future needs, your future goals, and also your money goals and your retirement plan. But today we're really focusing on creator tactics and storytelling. These are all the things that I wish I knew when I started out 6 years ago. So hopefully you can learn from my lessons. Here's a timed breakdown of everything that we're going to cover. Just for these first few minutes, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to jump straight into it. So we've got about 10-minute blocks of content, including suggestions of actions that you can take after this training. This will be recorded as well, don't worry. And then I want to leave 15 minutes for a Q&A. So of course, you can hit the Q&A button on Zoom if you're happy to submit a question there. But we've also got a Slido in the chat. So if you want to submit a question anonymously, head there. So what's Hustle Crew all about? So by now, you'll probably know this. That's why you're here. Our vision is a world in which businesses are centered on inclusion, belonging, and redistributing power. Many of us, despite being members of the global majority, do not have the power we wish we had at work. When it comes to speaking up for our needs, our wants, our wishes, it feels really hard to do that. And if we find the courage to do that, it often falls on deaf ears, like my needs to be more included in that startup I worked at 6 years ago. if I had more power in that situation, those conversations with my manager, the founders in San Francisco, could have gone very differently. But because I lacked power, being the only woman of color, the only Black woman, nothing really changed. And that's what Hustle Crew is all about. We want to change the status quo. We want to make it so regardless of your background, your socioeconomic class, your sexual preference, you have just as much a right to say what you need at work as the CEO, as the board member. That's the future that we dream of. And that's why we do this work. So a little bit of housekeeping. This is a safe and brave space, and I hope that we can all respect my stories and also respect each other. You've done a lot to show up today. That's already such a huge investment of your time. You should appreciate that. You should be grateful for that. But some complex emotions are going to arise. We're talking about money. We're talking about career goals. We're talking about career disappointments. Many of us, myself included, are still going through the process of processing those feelings. And a lot of those feelings are raw, and a lot of these things are really personal and not necessarily things that we talk about. But I will be talking about them to model the behavior I want to see from you. So as you're listening to my words, as you're listening to my stories, whatever questions come into your head, put them in the chat. This time is for you. And when you're here live, it's a chance for me to tailor the advice specifically to your needs. So be brave and share what you need to share so I can help you. I also hope that you can keep these stories, these intimate stories that I'm sharing, between us, between this community. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But some of the stories that I'm going to share now are not necessarily stories that I have talked about on social media or on my podcast. They're stories that I'm sharing, especially with you. So I hope you can keep them that way. All right. So let's jump into the first topic that I want to talk about in today's webinar. And that is, how do you choose which stories to share, and how do you prevent a vulnerability hangover? Now, I know what you're thinking. What is a vulnerability hangover, Abba? I have never heard of that. Well, Brene Brown, pictured on the right, is the person that introduced me to this phrase. So you might know about the concept of vulnerability from her viral TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. And in that, Brene Brown talks about the fact that the shame that's attached with being honest about our feelings, honest about our desires, honest about our wants, that shame that we have, that's often been there maybe since childhood, maybe since, our parents made us feel bad, a teacher made us feel bad for being different, for being ourselves. That shame becomes a blocker to real, meaningful connection. And she thinks the antidote to that shame, to that blocker to connection, is vulnerability. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And I'm just going to also hide Abiola. So when Brene Brown says that shame is a blocker to vulnerability, she's saying that she wants us to be honest about our experiences and use those experiences to connect with people. And if I reflect on my own experience of building a brand and building a company, I have really leaned into that advice. I have done my very best to talk about where I, was disappointed by the industry, where I made mistakes, where I've learned, but there comes a cost with being vulnerable. And that's what Brene Brown talks about when she talks about a vulnerability hangover. She talks about one of the first times she ever did a lecture. She talked about her own journey of trying to come to terms with her past, her own journey of going into therapy, her own journey of trying to be a better wife, a better mom. And she said she woke up the next day with a feeling of dread, genuine dread, where she thought, what have I done? I've literally put all my dirty laundry out there for everyone to know, and I cannot take it back. And that's what the phrase vulnerability hangover means. Now, the reason I'm starting off by telling you about this is because I don't want you to start this journey of building your brand, talking about yourself on LinkedIn, talking about your learnings on Twitter, posting reels on Instagram, making TikToks, without appreciating that whatever you put out into the public domain is in the public domain. And despite what you might think from all the amazing influencers and reality TV shows that are out there, privacy is your human right. Unfortunately, it's also yours to defend and protect. And it's a very slippery slope once you start putting yourself out there, talking about your setbacks, talking about your failures. Once you put things out there, it can be really hard to claw them back. Speaking from personal experience, I have a Google alert for my name, okay? So I have a Google alert for my name, don't laugh. A Google alert for anytime someone mentions Abadesi, Hustle Crew. And it's actually astounding the amount of very tiny media publications you've never even heard of that will go ahead and write a biography about you. Most of the time, it's not even accurate, it's not even true, but they'll just go around and find little snippets of information that they've sourced from all the different corners of the internet. And, my friends and I, we laugh at these people who think I'm married to so-and-so, born on this day, grew up in that country, not necessarily true. But I share this story as a reminder to you that what goes in the public domain can then not really be taken away. So please be really mindful about the stories that you choose to share. Now, back to the slides. The beautiful Maya Angelou on the left. Why is Maya Angelou there? Well, because Maya Angelou said, people don't really remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. And that's such a big part of you being an influencer, being a creator, and putting out your personal brand. You have to think about, what do you want people to feel when they read your post? Do you want them to feel inspired? Do you want them to feel seen? Do you want them to feel heard? Do you want them to feel like, wow, this person really gets me? If that's the case, then work backwards from that goal. So just looking at the first paragraph, really great starters for you as you start to build your personal brand are, what was a negative experience that ended up being positive? If I think of the Hustle Crew origin story, it started from a really dark place. Like I said, I quit that startup, no next move plan. No one wanted to give me a reference. I was interviewing everywhere and I was like the black sheep of the startup land. No one would offer me a job because no one could get references for me. Over the long arc of time, I'm now on this journey doing this work, which is so much more fun and so much more fulfilling, but it started from a dark place. That's a story that I'm happy to share because enough time has passed and, I've grown. But you might also want to share a lesson, a learning that you wish you had learned earlier. Another thing that you want to think about is when you start telling your story to build your brand, to get speaking engagements, to get interviews, you have to think about the fact that they have to be stories that do not hurt you to retell. They have to be stories that don't feel too precious for public consumption. Now, one really cool thing about the time that we live in is that there are tools that help protect you online. Block Party by Tracy Chow is an amazing version of that, but it's still up to you to be mindful about the stories, the topics that you're happy to engage in a public forum versus maybe just keep in a private WhatsApp group because you're not ready to, start engaging with trolls about that. So anyway, just to round up this topic, I wanted to give you some really specific examples that you can mull on, as well as some actions that you can take moving forward. So now that you've decided to start posting, right, to get more opportunities, to get a pay rise, whatever it is, build your brand, think about what is a lesson you have learned on this career journey that you're on that you feel comfortable sharing with potentially thousands of people on the internet. Now, if you're kind of struggling to think like, well, I guess I could talk about how I taught myself how to code or how I went from startups into corporate or talk about how becoming a dad changed my attitude to work, whatever it is, I want you to imagine the worst case scenario of someone reacting to your story. Because it takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of guts to go public with something meaningful and true to you. But there's always going to be someone out there who's willing to be like, just nasty about it, just rude about it. And so think about what you would do if someone was nasty about that story. And if you're just like, well, whatever, I'll mute them, I'll block them, cool. But if you're like, oh, I don't know, that story just feels a little too precious, you're not ready to share that story yet. One thing that you can do is practice with loved ones, right? So you can just make a little voice recording, a little video recording of you recounting the story. Hey, everyone, let me tell you about how, becoming a parent changed my attitude to work, or how moving out of the city or becoming a digital nomad or whatever it might be, really changed me. Practice it and see if you kind of feel like, you know what, this is a story that I am like totally happy to now like almost disassociate from emotions and the memory and turn into a speech and turn into a really fun piece of content. Now back to the vulnerability hangover and how we're going to prevent them. Just remember that you can prevent the risk of being too vulnerable, too honest, too raw by scripting what you're going to say. You can put a few bullet points down before you start your Twitter thread. You can put a few bullet points down before you start your Instagram reel. You get to control what you're putting out there content-wise. And similarly, you can also practice. If you have been invited onto a podcast or you have been invited onto a panel, you can, in your mind, already have your sound bites ready. You know how you watch politicians on the news and they get asked like 20 different questions, but they just say the one same statement? If you're just starting out and you're nervous, be that person. Have your soundbite ready, have your safe story ready, and then just recycle it. And then finally, remember that your audience will determine how that story lands. I remember one of the first times I was invited to speak at Google Campus. I was so excited. By that point, I had maybe done 5 or 6 public speaking engagements. It was very early in the Hustle Crew journey. And most of those speaking engagements were to women's societies at universities. And in those groups, my content was popping. I was cracking jokes about sexism. I was cracking jokes about bias. People were loving it. So there I am at Google Campus, ready to do my spiel, ready to talk about why I started Hustle Crew and how I'm gonna like change the world. And I like put my jokes out and I'm talking crickets. Like literally all the punchlines where people would normally laugh, all the little bits where people would like nod along. It was just like radio silence. And I was just like, I am literally bombing this talk. And then I realized, oh my God, literally everyone here is like a white man. And I was like, know your audience, babe. But another thing for you to really remember is your audience matters and the content will land in a way depending on who that audience is. Final thing I want to say on this before I jump into the next topic of audience and platforms is you might be thinking, is Abadesi really telling me that I should just pick one safe story that I'm happy with as I'm starting creator mode and just keep going on and on about that? That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem interesting. Let me tell you, a story is like an onion, okay? You can just keep on peeling it, keep on peeling it. My Hustle Crew origin story is a very complex onion. And even now today, as I told you another layer of it, there are still more layers and more layers will be revealed over time. But that's one story, one safe narrative that I've been using for like, what, 6 years? And you can do that too. You can find the arc, the setback and then the uplift, whatever it is. And then you can find different ways to spin it. Okay, so let's move on to topic number 2. Who is your audience and what platform are they on? So one of the things that's really going to elevate you to the next level, I'll just stop sharing my screen again for a little second. One of the things that's really going to elevate you to the next level as a side hustler, as a consultant, as someone who gets public speaking gigs is press, right? It's really important to try and get press features, media, anything like that. And the way that you get featured in interviews, asked to write articles, asked to write guest blogs is actually by like appealing to a very specific niche. And because it's 2023, it's not enough anymore to just be a woman in tech. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of value in being a woman in tech, but you need to be as specific as possible. And it's not even enough to be like a Black woman in tech. You want to be like a Black woman in tech who builds productivity tools with no code platforms. Like you want to be as specific as possible. And the more specific you can be, the more you're going to cut through the noise that already exists and really speak to an audience. And it's not really about the size of your audience these days. It's just about relevance. It's about finding the people who really connect with everything that you're saying and everything that you're doing, because those are the people that become the gateways to come into my company. We'd love to hear you talk. Or, oh, my friend is a journalist and is interviewing people and I put you forward. When you are willing to be incredibly specific and incredibly niche with the type of people that you're attracting, you create a really unique and meaningful connection. And that's what creates opportunities. So that's what's worked for me. And that's why I'm sharing that advice with you here. So in your early days, when you are just starting out on LinkedIn, wherever it might be, and we're going to come to platforms in a minute, but in your early days, your audience will always be people like you, right? Going back to Brene Brown, what did she say in her viral TED Talk? People want to be seen, really seen. And the way that they feel seen is when they feel like they see you. When you're speaking honestly, candidly, here was my experience, that was rubbish, Here's what I've learned. This is how I'm making it better. The language that you use, the experiences that you share, those are going to spark connections with people that can relate to that. And the most obvious way that we relate to people at first, especially those of us, who have the privilege of sight, is what we see, right? We see people and we're like, she looks like me, he looks like me. What's he talking about? What's she talking about? The next thing is they work in my field. I also do software engineering in health tech. What are they saying? What are they doing? So the first thing I want to say is like, don't complicate it. Start by speaking to people like you. And over time, you will build up to speaking to CEOs and billionaires and award-winning journalists or whatever you need. But at first, just start with people like you because they're the ones who are going to listen. Now, in terms of platforms, I strongly recommend, highly recommend starting with the platform you spend the most time on. You might have been reading statistics about TikTok usage or Twitch usage. None of that is relevant as you begin your journey of creator mode, influencer mode. For now, you just go with the platform that you spend the most time with. Why? Because you already have a lot of intuition about how that platform works. You know the aesthetics of it, you know the hashtags of it, you know how to engage with people. And that means that there's less friction to you just starting to talk about careers, starting to talk about your career, starting to talk about your skills and your side hustle. Don't worry about being on multiple channels at first. Don't think, oh gosh, I haven't posted on Twitter in a while, and then I haven't done LinkedIn, and then I haven't done Instagram, and I haven't posted a TikTok. Just start with one. There are brands out there turning over millions of dollars a year that are only on one social media platform. Yes, it's true. Start with one channel and own that channel. Be relevant on that channel, be active on that channel, be engaged on that channel. Your channel could be newsletter. Honestly, do you know the amount of people that have sold me stuff through their Substacks? It's surprising, and it's a lot. So whatever platform tool you're already spending a lot of time in, if you love to read emails, you're probably going to be a newsletter. If you love scrolling Instagram, you're probably going to be an Instagram person. Whatever it is, just take that leap on the platform you're already on. Hey, even if it's LinkedIn. I know LinkedIn is not cool. My husband works in the creative industry. A lot of our friends do. They laugh at me because I'm on LinkedIn posting all the time. Guess what? LinkedIn gets me paid. Okay, laugh all you want. It is a lead generator. LinkedIn is like the only social media platform you're actually allowed to be on at work. No one's going to hate on you. So if you're thinking of like, hey, I'm actually someone that's going to develop a side hustle that's relevant for businesses, or I'm someone that's going to speak on topics that are relevant for CEOs, for HR directors, for CTOs, whatever it is, you should be on LinkedIn. Why not? The other thing I want to say about this is be realistic about how long it takes you to create content. And that's another reason why you should really just lean into the form of content creation that's easiest for you. Absolutely, use ChatGPT to write your email newsletter if you are time strapped, but it's going to feel authentic, it's going to feel personal, and it's going to feel connected to the person that eventually shows up on stage to speak or shows up to consult or whatever it is, if it's coming from you. And don't be afraid to recycle old content, okay? So you can go back through the archives and try to think about amazing things that you've achieved, tell a story about that, tell a story about how you achieve those things so that your fans can learn from you. So to wrap up this section, once again, I want to share some really specific examples of how you put this into action now that you're kind of thinking about, okay, I'm going to define my audience. I'm going to define the first platform I want to build on. What happens? So one of the most easiest tasks you can set yourself after this webinar is just think of a relatable content creator that you love. How do they share their experiences to build a connection? Is it a carousel of posts? Is it screenshots of articles that they've been reading? Is it a podcast? Is it a little video to camera? How do they do it? And why do you enjoy it? What can you emulate from that example? The next thing I want you to think about is which aspects of your identity have shaped who you are, right? What are the parts of you that you cannot mute? You cannot erase, you cannot deny. Maybe they're even the things that have caused friction in your life. When I think back to that startup, one of the things that became like a drama was the fact that someone touched my hair while I was on a sales call, literally came up from behind me, started playing with my afro, finished the sales call with a client very uncomfortably, turned to him and was like, dude, what the F? And he says, I've decided I'm going to use your afro as my stress ball. No, don't touch my hair. Solange said it best, right? So now I want to talk about the fact that when you're the only person in an office, the only person with an afro, it suddenly becomes your responsibility to tell people, this ain't a chia pet. I don't care if you're a 90s kid. This is literally my hair and how it grows. Now that's something that caused friction in my life, but it's become a really powerful story that people connect to and relate to and are just like, oh my God, Abadesi, yes. Why do people do this to us? La-di-da-di-da. So think about those things and share them if you're comfortable with it. Another thing that you can think about is like, what other part of you is either underrepresented at work or should just be more visible or the norm? Maybe you have a hidden disability. Maybe you didn't go to university. Maybe you're a self-taught programmer. Maybe you just noticed, you know what, my experience is a bit of an outlier here, but this outlier experience is actually incredibly valuable, incredibly unique. Think about how you can start building stories around that. And when you do, people who are similar will find you and gain value from your content. When I first started Hustle Crew, most of my invoices, I remember doing my accounts in my first year, most of my invoices were signed and paid for by people who were the only Black woman in their startup. Because that was my story. I was like, yo, I was the only Black woman and things happened. And I would talk about it on LinkedIn. I would talk about it in the newsletter. And one by one, all these women were just like, come and do a workshop, come and do a talk. They were the only Black woman too. So think about those things that make you unique and think about your niche. And then I've just kind of put a little summary there about the kind of platforms you might want to think about using. Like I said, if you like writing, email newsletters are for you. Don't sleep on newsletters. Newsletters are a very powerful way to build community. And like I said, you can monetize newsletters, whether that's sponsored posts, whether that's, actually like selling your own products, digital products, PDFs that you've made, selling your time, build a community and find the engagement. I think of people like Dan Runcie and Trapital. He wanted to talk about the business of hip hop. And, now he's getting brands dropping in there, paying him money to be in his newsletter, paying him to be advertised in their podcast. So there's a lot of power for people who are good at writing and don't necessarily want to just put their face out there. Same goes for Twitter threads. Twitter threads are a great way to build clout, especially in our industry. You can get conferences, you can get podcast features just from being on Twitter. LinkedIn, we've already spoken a little bit about, but definitely be on LinkedIn if that's the one for you. Now, if you're a more visual person and you're already on Instagram or TikTok, then start talking about your career there. What have you learned? What skills do you want to build? What are the personal reflections that other people might relate to? And if you're really, really passionate about speaking or you just enjoy riffing, waxing lyrical, then podcast could be for you. Now, there's nothing to stop you from reaching out to a podcast that you really like listening to and offering yourself as a guest. If you have a story to tell, you want to build your brand a little bit, why not? Come to them with a pitch, come to them with an angle, come to them with an idea that you have for how you can, add value to their listeners. And I'm sure they would love to hear from you. So I'm just going to pause there and remind everyone that you can submit questions anonymously via Slido. So please go ahead and do that. If you have any questions on choosing which stories to tell, protecting your privacy, like avoiding vulnerability hangovers. If you have any questions about how to choose the right platform for you to start building your personal brand on and landing new opportunities, getting more visibility in the industry, or if you have any questions about how to identify your audience, if you're really thinking about what is my next job and how can I make sure it's a jump from my last one, I want a pay rise, I want a seniority rise, or maybe you're thinking, how can I make the most of this brand to actually pivot into a new industry and a new vertical? Who should my audience be then? Which platform should I be on then? Whatever your question is, please submit it because I would love to answer it. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the third topic. And as I said at the start, I really wanted to make sure that the time that we had together was a chance for me to share the lessons that I wish that I knew before I started Hustle Crew 6 years ago, you know, before I won Computer Weekly Most Influential, Financial Times Most Influential Leaders, things that I wish I knew before I set foot on this journey. And one of the things that I wish I knew was the minute you decide to enter the public domain, the minute you decide to put yourself out there, especially if you're underrepresented, especially in tech, you expose yourself to the risk of a lot of negative energy and a lot of hatred. You know, a lot of people listen to Techish Pod and most of them are fans, which is amazing. Not all of them are. And similarly, a lot of people get me to come on stage and speak about diversity, inclusion, representation, anti-racism. A lot of the time the people are receptive and they're amazing and, you know, want to ask me engaging questions. Every now and then there's a hater in the room and it hurts. So this next section is all about the advice I want to give you for managing your energy in a way that won't leave you drained, especially for those of you who are a bit more introverted, ambivert, and you're just like, I'm already tired just thinking about talking about myself. I'm going to give you a few tactics, and I'm also going to share with you like how I've just gone about basically managing those haters. Hint, aggressive blocking and muting. So how do you define and uphold your boundaries? And also, how do you choose when or not to engage with comments, right? I come from a community building background. I used to do community product hunt. Hustle Crew is a community. We literally started with meetups in the South Bank Center every first Saturday of the month back in 2016. So, you know, I'm all about that. And that means that my very nature is to engage, right? You ask me a question, I'm going to respond. You're giving me a compliment, I am going to thank you. But that comes with a cost. It comes with the cost of your time. It comes with the cost of your energy. And it comes with the risk that some of the people that you're engaging with are not meeting you at a respectful level. In fact, they're just trying to bait you into an argument because they're hiding behind a screen. You don't even know, are they real? Are they in a bot form? Who knows? And, you know, I think of the time where Techish decided to cover virtual influencers. Some of you might remember that episode. We did an episode about Shuju, the virtual influencer. So she's a Black model. Many people didn't realize she was not real. She's modeled for Gucci, Prada, all these amazing luxury brands. And many people also didn't realize that she's been designed by a white man, right? So there's a white man who has designed not only Shuju, but other Black and, you know, POC models, engages in these luxury fashion campaigns, in my opinion, taking money out of the pockets of actual real life Black female models who could be getting paid. Now, we talked about this on Techish. Because we talked about it on Techish, I was then invited to speak on Al Jazeera, the news channel. So I was on Al Jazeera saying the same things I said on Techish. As a Black woman, it makes me feel uncomfortable. It's virtual blackface. There's a white guy creating a virtual Black person, getting money from brands when we know that there's an income gap for like Black women everywhere, every industry. And it just makes me angry that someone can even do that. And then the long-term impact of that is just huge. It's an opportunity cost. And because I said that, whoo, lordy, the DMs I got, aggressive, hateful, mean, people just saying, how dare you, let him do his thing, what's so bad about that? And I was blindsided, if I'm honest. Like, I didn't expect that many people to be so angry with what I said, especially people who don't share my lived experience. Like, I'm going to say what I want to say as a Black woman about people who are pretending to be Black women, because that's my right. And there were people who were just so vitriolic. It was pretty bad. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I wish I knew then. Well, first of all, I wish Block Party had Instagram features then, so I could have used it. But also, I wish that I just knew it's best to not read, let alone engage. Block, delete, block, delete. So what I'm trying to say is, what does your social media hygiene look like right now? I'm not pointing fingers, okay? I'm not judging. I'm just asking you to do this assessment for yourself. I want you to think about how much time you spend on social media platforms, right? Like if you've decided, you know what, Abadesi is right, I'm going to double down on LinkedIn because I want to double my salary, I'm making this happen, let's go. Are you happy with the amount of time that you spend on the internet, on social media, or are you already thinking that you want to spend less? Because that's really going to define how you engage as a creator and how you engage as someone building a personal brand. It means that you're going to have to be really disciplined, because these tools have been designed to give us that dopamine hit, appeal to our reptile brain. They're already quite addictive. When you now start purposefully, intentionally putting content out there with the goal of increasing your salary, increasing your income, growing your side hustle, your business, whatever it is, it's only going to become more addictive. And I just want to tell you that honestly, so that you can now start thinking about, okay, yes, I am going to go on this journey. I am going to take these steps, but I'm going to be aware of the risks, okay, to my mental health. I'm going to be aware of how much discipline it's going to take for me, because I don't want y'all to like activate creator mode, start getting paid, but then stop sleeping because there's too much blue light in your life, too much screen time in your life. So think about how activating creator mode is going to impact your social media hygiene, and it's going to impact your boundaries. And think about any, guardrails that you can put in place to be just quite protective of your well-being. Like, okay, yes, I'm going to post this frequently, but I'm only going to let myself check the comments or the engagement X times a day. And I'm only going to reply X times a day. And on the weekends, no, I'm not going to do any business stuff on the weekends. Weekends is just personal time, because social media for many of us is a place that is both personal and professional. I don't even see my Instagram as something for my friends anymore. It's just been taken over by my business. And that was a choice, right? Like now I just share photos with my friends through the DMs or, on WhatsApp. But I'm many, many years into this journey, and I don't want you to have to make any quick decisions just yet. I just want you to think about what matters to you and how you can manage it and how you can protect yourself. And on that topic of protecting yourself, I want to talk about negative energy. Now, over the long arc of time, I've realized it's never worth it to engage. It's never worth it to engage. Just tell your stories for the people who want to hear them. And some people might pretend like they want to hear them, but they don't really want to hear them. They just want to fight with you, or they just want to prove a point to themselves. Your personal brand is there for the people who want to hear it. At the end of the day, you are investing this time and this energy for your needs, your wants, and your goals, okay? So the minute it stops feeling fun to you, the minute it stops feeling aligned with what you want, is the minute someone else is dictating it. And trolls should not be the people to dictate what you say online or how you say it. That's wasting your time. It's not your job to convince people who don't want to listen. It's not your job to convince people who are reluctant to learn. It's your job to show up, be yourself, and be there for the people that come to you. So how do we put this in action? As I said, your personal brand exists to serve your goals and your goals alone, not your partners, not your friends, not your families, not your old boss, not your next boss, not your customer, your client. It's about you. Be selfish and be ruthlessly focused on your goal. Why are you doing this? To get that pay rise, to get that new role, to launch this business, whatever it is. Always remember why you are doing it. And when you're in doubt, should I answer? Go back to that why. It's like that Simon Sinek TED Talk, the power of why. Why is an incredible compass. It is an incredible compass. When you are losing direction and you're just like not sure, come back to the why, and the why will guide you clearly, clear as day. Trust me. The next thing I want to say is, like, yes, your online community matters, and your online community are future customers, future collaborators. That's 100% been the case with Hustle Crew. Many of our leads come from people who follow us on Instagram, who follow us on LinkedIn. We don't do outbound sales, and yet we manage to grow and we manage to turn over a profit. How? Because we tell the stories that certain people want to hear and get value from, and then those people open doors for us. They create opportunities for us. So community is everything. Of course, I'm going to tell you that. But community does not matter more than you, okay? You matter, your health matters, your well-being matters. And sometimes that means you need to take a pause from creator mode. You need to go offline. You need to do nothing for a week or two or whatever. Do you? That's what matters. You are in this for the long run. We are going to be working for a long amount of time. Most of the people in this room are in their 20s or in their 30s. We got a long way to go, y'all. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Build it at a pace that you can tolerate, that you can manage, that doesn't leave you feeling burned out. The other thing I want to say is you always have to answer to yourself, right? So be willing to say no, because brands will come and go, and nothing should ever strip you of your dignity or like strip you of the joy of doing this work. So if someone's like, hey, I really want to collaborate with you, and then as the conversation progresses, they're trying to make you work for free, they're trying to make you do things you don't want to do, drop it, ghost them, walk away, whatever. Like, you are the person that matters most in this journey of becoming a creator, in this journey of, you know, leveling up your career and getting paid what you want when you want. So just remember that, okay? Like, be willing to say no as well. The other thing I wanted to say is, if there's an important story that you feel compelled to tell, right? Maybe it's what happened to you in your last job. Maybe it's the reason why you're starting out as a consultant or a side hustler. Repeat it. Tell the story in many, many different ways, because no one's going to listen the first time, maybe one person, the next time, maybe two more people. Each time you tell it, it's going to strike a different chord. It's going to land in a different way. It's going to connect in a different way. So it's really important that you get comfortable repeating the same stories. And that's also positive, because it means you're never going to run out of material. You don't need to worry, because you can keep telling the same story in different ways that appeal to different people. You can go back to that metaphor of the onion, peel back a few different layers of your story onion, and think about new aspects to share. But yeah, like, don't be shy about just going over that same lesson, learning whatever it is from a different perspective. And the final thing I wanted to say, just to kind of recap, is start safe and start small, right? Personal branding and finding your audience on whatever platform you choose, so that you can get those press features, those awards, those public speaking gigs, whatever it might be. They happen, you know, really because of like consistency. So if you go too big too soon and burn out, then you're just going to stop. But you need to be in the game for the long run, right? I started Hustle Crew in 2016. Like, I can't even believe that when I say that, because I'm like, how am I that old? I genuinely still feel like I'm 24. I'm not. But yeah, you know, just start safe and start small. And you can build up to the more risque stories as you get more confident navigating the public, navigating your voice. You know, the Shuju debacle, the virtual blackface debacle, thankfully happened about 2 years into my podcasting journey. And by that point, I had a community, I had a platform, I had a speaking agent. So the hate, I was just like, whatever, I don't care. Like, you mean nothing to me, I'll be good. But if that had happened to me at the beginning of Techish, I don't know if I could have continued, because it was so negative and it was so hurtful. So start safe, start small, something you can manage, something you can like continue to do consistently, and you'll be good. Okay, so that is all of the prepared content that I had for you today. This is the moment when I get to hear from you. See if there are any questions that you had or anything that's come up. Feel free to pop them into the chat. Okay, cool. So I can see there's a question here. How do you overcome imposter syndrome or low self-confidence when posting on platforms like LinkedIn, where seemingly everyone comes across like an expert? That is a fantastic question. Now, the thing about LinkedIn is it's quite boastful, isn't it? It's quite boastful. People are just like, oh, look, I'm so amazing. Oh, God, I just won another award. But what I think is really quite compelling is actually if you did the opposite, right? So imagine if your first LinkedIn post was, here I go, it's my first LinkedIn post. I don't even feel qualified to be speaking on a platform like this, where everyone looks like an expert, but I wanted to share something. Here it is. you don't have to be someone that you're not, and you don't have to like pretend to, you know, be smarter than you are, more accomplished than you are. That's what Brene Brown was talking about when she said lean into vulnerability. Like imposter syndrome, low self-confidence, a lot of that comes from like the shame that she talks about that she found in her research, right? Like, oh my God, I'm ashamed of how few qualifications I have to now be speaking about being a software engineer, or I'm ashamed at how many less years of working as an entrepreneur I have versus Sophia Amoroso to now even be talking on LinkedIn, the same platform that she is, talking about her business. If you can overcome that very natural doubt and shame that Brene Brown identified in her research and almost use that as a starting point for conversation, I bet you there are going to be so many people that see that, relate to that, and engage with that, going, oh my gosh, do you know what? I have been wanting to post on LinkedIn too, because I'm also looking for a new job, or I'm also trying to switch careers. And seeing you post about what you're going through and admitting that you're quite nervous to do that because, you know, you're not really sure, has inspired me to do the same. So I would probably say, like, just lean into that energy. Like, don't try to be someone that you're not. Don't try to, you know, emulate other people. Eventually, you are going to be that expert. You know, you start where you are now and you keep posting, learning, growing, reflecting on your experiences. In no time, you are going to be that person that you kind of thought now, wow, they're so amazing. That will be you. But everyone needs to start somewhere. I myself started somewhere, right? Like I've managed to bring all of you people here now, which is incredible. But I also started somewhere, okay? Like I also had to just put a link in post that maybe one or two people engage with, start an email newsletter that like only had 2 of my friends on it. We all start somewhere. So I guess what I would say is be honest about where you are and start there, because there's no shame in that. We're all growing. There is no person in the world that knows everything. And if someone tells you that they do, they have an agenda and something's going wrong somewhere. So yeah, I would probably say just like be honest and be yourself. And thank you for your question. Okay, a question that came in earlier. How do you get over the nerves that come with putting yourself out there on social media? I definitely think that it's anything you're afraid of, you basically just have to do. Was it Eleanor Roosevelt that said, do something every day that scares you? I think the sentiment in that quote is the more you do scary things, the more confidence and courage you have. And so it's true of building your personal brand. It's true of putting yourself out there. If you never do it, it will always be scary because it will always be an unknown experience. But if you eventually do it, go and speak on that panel, go back to your old university and volunteer to speak at an event, you know, put yourself forward to be on your friend's podcast so you can practice public speaking, create that LinkedIn post so you can finally like talk about what your career goals are, what you want to do next. The minute you do that, it is an actual real experience that you can collect evidence from. But until then, it's just a bunch of thoughts that are probably not very positive, right? It's a bunch of fears, it's a bunch of hangups, it's a bunch of nerves. But we all need to build our lives from like real data, real evidence. So the way that you get over any inhibitions or any fears is to do something that you're afraid of and then go, oh, wait a minute, that actually wasn't that scary. It's like the first time, I don't know, you like swim in cold water, take a cold shower, sign up for a sporting event, pick up a new hobby or a new sport. The thought of it is often more frightening and intimidating than the reality of it. And that will be true of your entrepreneurship journey, your next career step, and your influencer journey as well. So one thing that Anthony said, oh, hi, Anthony, I dig the parts about starting with the platform you're currently using. Yes, absolutely. So many people feel pressured into being on the platforms that are hot, that are trending. And, you know, it's amazing that you're switched on to the news and like what's big in media, but all that really matters is being on the place where you can consistently do the work, because that's what it's all about, right? Just like you're showing up here today, showing up live, you are doing the work, but this isn't the only work, right? Now, when the webinar ends, you're going to get the worksheet, you're going to remember everything that I've talked about, and you're going to continue crafting your content, thinking about your story, thinking about the narrative that you want to develop. And that's really what the work is about. It's about doing it, and it's about doing it consistently. So that's why I'm telling you, pick the platform that you're already on, pick the platform that you can consistently come back to, because that way you can put out that monthly newsletter with no hesitation, or that weekly update with no hesitation. And it's in that incremental building that your community will form, and that your relevance will form, and your thought leadership will form. When you consistently make statements, make comments, share opinions, people will regard you as someone worth listening to. And that can only happen if you keep doing it. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, I don't want to rush anybody or assume anything, but if there are no other questions, then I guess we shall bring this webinar to an end. Now, in future webinars, we are going to be talking about tapping into your network. So how can you actually start getting those connections, those followers that you have, and turn them into opportunities, and do it in a way that doesn't feel like cold, salesy, because we've all made that mistake of adding someone to our LinkedIn network and then being bombarded with sales pitches we didn't want to hear. So in the next webinar, we're going to talk about, like, one, cultivating your network, cultivating your connections, and then turning those connections into opportunities in a way that's quite organic and not super salesy. And then in part 4, we're going to talk about how you actually get paid. So we're talking about when someone then comes to you with an opportunity, how you can bring up money and negotiate in a way that maximizes their budget. So I'm going to talk to you about creating menus, creating options, and all that good stuff. But let's leave it at that. I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody that's shown up today. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone that's engaging with our content. Thanks to everyone that is referring Hustle Crew and also referring these events. If you do know anyone who's been laid off or let down at work recently, please get them to register, share the link. We want to keep helping people. You know, this is probably one of the toughest times that the tech industry has been through, certainly since I joined it over 10 years ago, but we can be here for each other and really help us get through this. So the next session will be in 2 weeks' time, and I hope I get to see you all there. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. See you soon.